In the 2007-2008 season, the Chicago Bulls had failed expectations after having gone the prior year 49-33 and winning their first playoff series for the first time since the 1998 championship season. Well, in the 2007-08 season, the Bulls finished with the opposite record, going 33-49. Head coach Scott Skiles was fired mid-season, and the team, although still promising with young talent, was a bit of a loss in terms of the direction of the franchise going forward. Now, because the Bulls missed the playoffs but also had won too many games, their odds of winning the lottery were incredibly low at 1.7% of landing the #1 pick. Well, lo and behold, the Bulls hit the lottery jackpot and got the #1 pick, which of course they used to select Derrick Rose, the hometown Chicago native, in the 2008 draft. And that's who I want to talk about in today's video, specifically as it pertains to his upcoming free agency. So what's going on, everyone? You are listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Guys, real quick, be sure to follow me on Twitter if you're interested. A lot of folks have been asking me about creating a Twitter account for the channel, and I finally did that last week. I've got a link to my Twitter page in the description, or you can also just search for me with the username bulls.central. You can also follow me on Instagram, and feel free to join the Bulls Central Discord. All of that is linked in the description as well. But anyway, let's talk about Derrick Rose. So the story of Derrick Rose as a player is one of the most captivating ones throughout the league, because he went from being selected by his hometown team, where really it was a scenario of all the stars aligning for the Bulls to even be able to land him, because like I mentioned, the Bulls were not expected to be a lottery team that season, given they went to the playoffs the prior year, and the fact that they did reach the lottery when they did, they had no business in landing the #1 pick with the odds that they had. Rose plays for his hometown team and was really a savior for the franchise, because not only was he a hometown fan favorite, he was also an incredible player that instantly became the Bulls' best player in his rookie season, leading the Bulls back to the playoffs that year. And then of course, Rose got better and better and eventually became the youngest MVP in league history, and leading the Bulls to the best record in the NBA in back-to-back seasons. Derrick Rose himself put the Chicago Bulls back on the map and made them relevant again for the first time since the 90s. And it wasn't all just Derrick Rose. I know guys like Joakim Noah, Luol Deng, and even Tom Thibodeau were instrumental in that, but Rose was really the driving force for bringing the franchise back to relevancy. It was almost like a fairy tale story. You know, here you have the youngest player ever to become an MVP in league history. He was from Chicago and was bringing the Bulls back to the promised land that all of us longtime Bulls fans were waiting so patiently for. A 22-year-old who in theory hadn't even reached his prime yet, was only scratching the surface of the impact he would have on the league, and had continued to progress further and further. Well, unfortunately, we all know what happened. I don't think I even need to explain it, as it still pains Bulls fans to this day, but Rose tore his ACL in Game 1 of the 2012 playoffs, when the Bulls were the #1 seed in the East and looking for a rematch against the Miami Heat from the Eastern Conference Finals of last year. The Bulls went on to lose that first round series without Rose, and having missed an entire season, when Rose did come back, he injured himself yet again, this time tearing his MCL, which caused him to miss the remainder of that season. And despite Rose returning and having a decent season in 2015, and of course the game-winning shot in Game 3 of the Eastern Semis against the Cavs, it wasn't enough to defeat LeBron James. The Bulls were later eliminated in that series. Tom Thibodeau was fired the following season, and in that year, the Bulls went from playoff contenders to missing the playoffs under Fred Hoiberg, and the front office decided to move on from Derrick Rose in trading him to the New York Knicks after 7 seasons with the Chicago Bulls. Now, that was tough for me as a Bulls fan, because while I understood why the move was made and knew that it was probably the right move for the franchise given where Rose was at his point in his career and the unlikelihood of him ever returning to form again, it was still hard to accept that that era was over. The excitement, the hype that was finally brought back to the Bulls franchise was coming to a close, and even though the Bulls held on to it a bit with Jimmy Butler for the time being, you almost knew that the writing was on the wall that this team was going to go into rebuild mode with the way that they had performed the following season after trading Rose, and wouldn't you know it, they did after pulling the trigger in trading Jimmy Butler. Now for Rose, he went on to play for the Knicks all but 1 season before playing for the Cavs, to then getting traded mid-season to the Jazz, where he was then waived, and Rose almost considered retiring at that point, as the mental exhaustion of his up and down career had appeared to be weighing on him. But luckily, Tom Thibodeau, who was then coaching the Timberwolves, wanted to bring Rose back to his team, And then Rose played for a season and a half with the Wolves, and although now not returning to his MVP form, Rose started playing some of the best basketball that he had been playing since tearing his ACL back in 2012. Rose then received a contract from the Detroit Pistons, continued to play very well, again, not back to Rose MVP form, but for a veteran point guard who had suffered so many injuries throughout his career, Rose was playing decently. He was then traded mid-season this past year to the Knicks to reunite with Tom Thibodeau yet again, and that's where we find ourselves today. And for the first time in a long time, Rose has been able to find himself on the playoff stage for one of the biggest franchises in the league. Although at the time of this recording, the playoff run could be coming to a close soon, with the Knicks now trailing the Hawks 3-1 in the first round. So that leads me into really the point of this video, and that's Rose's upcoming free agency. So as I'm sure most of you know, Rose is set to become an unrestricted free agent this offseason, meaning he is free to sign wherever he wants for whatever offer he gets. And Rose likely will have a lot of interested teams in him, given the fact that he's had a great season, he's a great veteran presence off the bench. Rose was one of the top candidates for Sixth Man of the Year, and he averaged a tad under 15 points per game and some of the best efficiency that he's had throughout his career, specifically his three-point shooting, which he shot the best that he's ever had, even since he was a rookie, from deep at near 39%, for a guy who has just never really been known to be a three-point shooter. 47% from the field to go along with 4.2 assists. Again, all of this coming off the bench, averaging around 25 minutes per game. Now, the question I get asked so much from so many of you, and based on comments I've seen from a host of Bulls fans on Twitter or Facebook group pages, is should the Bulls insert themselves as one of the candidates in pursuit of Derrick Rose this offseason? And sometimes it's not even a question, more of a Bulls need to pursue Rose this offseason. I've seen some people say that Rose is the missing piece that this Bulls team needs, or that he's even the point guard for the future, and I'll share my thoughts on that in a bit. But if you've seen my past hot take videos, I've addressed this point of Rose rejoining the Bulls and how I personally believe it's not a good idea and doesn't really make a ton of sense for the Bulls and what they're trying to do and what they actually need right now. Look, I get the nostalgia aspect of it, and I'm a softie when it comes to storylines like this, when you would have Rose reunited with the Bulls and their fan base and he balls out to finish his career in Chicago. I completely get this and would love that story, but the rational side of me says this doesn't help the Bulls at all. And I think a lot of Bulls fans are blinded by the fact that Rose, because of what he means to Chicago and the Bulls franchise, that this move would help them tremendously. And let me explain why that's not the case. First off, let's start with Rose and how he fits the Bulls timeline. So Rose is currently 32 years old. By the start of next season, he'll be 33, going into his 12th year in the league. Now, when you look at where the Bulls are and their current timeline, although the trade for Vucevic definitely accelerated that timeline, bringing in a 33-year-old point guard who is past his prime and although, is decently productive on the offensive end, is not that great on defense, which again, something the Bulls are in desperate need of, especially at the point guard position. Now, you're probably saying, well, dude, you just made a video on the Bulls free agency prospects and claimed that Kyle Lauri is a target that the Bulls should go after. He's 35 and past his prime. Yes, but Lauri, although older, in my opinion, is still a better player than Derrick Rose, a better leader, a more productive player, a better playmaker, and above all, a better defender than Rose. And I mentioned in that video, even with Lauri, that won't be the Bulls' long-term solution, rather using him as a mentor for Coby White and improving the roster in the near term while Coby continues to develop, and you're maximizing Zach Lavine and Nikola Vucevic's prime. So the argument that some are making that Rose is the missing piece for the Bulls and that he's the point guard for the future, no, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever given where he is at in his career, and that also applies to guys like Kyle Lauri. Now, the other piece of this is, well, how much is Rose going to command in free agency? Because this is the most consistent Rose has ever played in his career since tearing his ACL in 2012. He's playing some of his best basketball and actually helping teams to contribute in bettering their overall team success. I could easily see Rose getting a contract in the $10 to $12 million a year range. And if you watched my video on the Bulls' upcoming free agency and their cap space going into the offseason, the Bulls, if they want to bring in a big name that will have immediate impact on this team, making them better, you're going to need to be spending close to $20 million a year in that range on a specific player, whether that be through Lonzo Ball, Kyle Lauri, or some other marquee point guard that is going to be a free agent this offseason. Rose is nowhere near worth that much, but he is going to get a pretty sizable payday, which he rightfully should. But the Bulls are looking to spend a good portion of that cap space on a bigger name. They're not going to be able to afford Rose in the $10 to $12 million a year range. So that's another reason why bringing in Rose to the Bulls doesn't make sense. Then you have Rose and his skill set that he offers as a player. So as I mentioned, Rose is still very effective on offense. He's a great offensive player even at his age and after all of his injuries that he's gone through. He's been very efficient on offense, as well as recently late in shooting at a higher clip, turning the ball over a lot less and passing decently. But at the same time, his defense isn't anything to write home about. His playmaking isn't the same as it used to be when he was an MVP, averaging 8 assists per game. And although he's still a good productive scorer, he's not the Rose that we remember when he was an MVP, averaging well over 20 points per game. So his impact, although would be nice and a good improvement to the roster, it's not going to be a game changer like I hear of a lot of fans saying. And then finally, and of course this is just me speculating and completely my opinion alone, I'm not even sure Rose wants to return to Chicago. I know some people have been claiming that, he's said that he wants to come back and sign with Chicago, but there hasn't been a direct quote from him stating explicitly that. Rather, he has been quoted saying that he is open to playing for whatever team is interested in him, which, yes, could be Chicago, but he hasn't at any point stated that he wants to come back to Chicago specifically. And I've said this before, but I feel like part of the reason for why Rose might be a bit hesitant to return to Chicago is, well, one, the Bulls, although hopefully are trending upward, they are not contending now, and you would think at this stage in Rose's career, he's looking to go play for a team that can win a title. Second, there might still be some hard feelings or bitterness towards the franchise for trading him and essentially giving up on their hometown hero. I know it's not the same front office, but it's still the same owners. And does he want to come back and play for an organization that did that to him? And finally, we cannot forget that Rose was a bit mentally scarred from what happened with the major injuries in Chicago. And it was clear that those injuries got to him mentally, even after he returned to the court to Chicago, and the way that he was just more timid when driving to the basket and drawing contact like we used to see pre-injury. The way that he carried himself was significantly different after those injuries. And I think on top of all of that, there were such high expectations of Rose, even after he came back from his injuries, that he would just be the same player that he used to be. And then when he wasn't, he felt like he was letting the fans down, and in a way I think he had a hard time coming to grips that he would never be the MVP caliber player that he used to be in those highlight reel dunks and insane explosiveness to the hoop. He knew that he was never going to be that player again, but likely also knew that the fans were expecting him that he would be that player and come back to form like we used to see. And so I think Rose, the thought of him coming back in this stage of his career might be a bit unsettling for him, that he doesn't want to be a disappointment to the fans of Chicago, and he doesn't want to have to relive those memories of the injuries that essentially robbed him of potentially being the best player in the league and the face of the NBA. The last one aside though, because again, the last one, that is just me 100% speculating. Obviously, I don't know Rose personally, and I have no idea where his head is at in terms of how he feels about a return to Chicago. But for the other points I mentioned, that is why I feel he wouldn't be a good fit for the Bulls roster, and why it doesn't make sense to pursue him in this summer's free agency. I know a lot of Bulls fans aren't going to like me saying that, and I'll probably get a lot of dislikes on this video and some hating comments, which is fine. You guys are free to express your opinion, but for me, I'm trying to view this from the most realistic lens that I can of what is actually going to help the Bulls for the long term and be as unbiased as possible when assessing Rose's talent at this stage in his career appropriately. All that being said, I could be completely off and the Bulls end up pursuing him in free agency. Either way though, I want to know what you guys think. Do you think it makes sense for the Bulls to pursue Derrick Rose? Why or why not? Let me know in the comments. I'll also have a community poll of the questions, so be on the lookout for that. Also guys, I'll have my weekly hot takes video out tomorrow, so feel free to leave your hot takes here if you want to be included in tomorrow's video. And then also, as always, be sure to subscribe if you're a Bulls fan, as I do post daily Bulls content. Thanks again for tuning in, guys, and I will catch you in the next one.